It would be a gross understatement to say that we live in uncertain times today. We certainly do. And uncertainty can create in us all kinds of physical, emotional, and spiritual challenges. I hope this message on uncertainty will be helpful. We know who's in charge of our lives. Sometimes we don't feel that way, though, do we? Thank you again for tuning in. I hope this message will be helpful. This whole passage is about living with uncertainty. I was reading an article in Psychology Today. I read that often. I go look at different articles I'm curious about, and I read them. And one of the things it talked about is how to deal with chronic uncertainty. And one of the ways you deal with chronic uncertainty is to control the things you can control. And it's also important to embrace the uncertainty rather than fighting against it, just recognizing I'm living in uncertain times. And I will describe it this way. Moses wandered around the wilderness for 39 years. There's a lot of uncertainty there, right? Abram leaves Ur of the Chaldees, going out somewhere. He has no idea where he's going. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Peter, James, and John drop their nets. A lot of uncertainty there, right? So a lot of uncertainty around us. Another thing it talks about with how to manage uncertainty is so basic that sometimes we overlook it. It's something we were taught in first, second, or third grade. What are you talking about? Getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, and eating good food. 3 basic truths that haven't changed, have they? And when we're in a time of uncertainty, it's important to do that. Another point that the author made of this article in Psychology Today was self-care. So often we don't do that. And let me illustrate it this way. A view of self-care that I have. How many times, and I'll be honest, I know we're in church and I know we're Christians, it's hard to be honest. Be honest. How many times have you said recently, I can't believe I'm so dumb. I can't believe I did that. I was so stupid. Have any of you relate to that? Now, my advice to you, very bluntly, is try treating yourself like you'd treat your neighbor. If your neighbor did something really dumb, you're not going to go, hey, you're dumb. I can't believe how dumb you are. No, what are you going to say? You're going to say, well, you're human. We all make mistakes, right? So treat yourself like a neighbor. These are stuff out of Psychology Today I thought was worth hearing. One of the fascinating things I read in Psychology Today was about women in college and how they were attracted to men. The question was asked, are you more attracted to a guy who you know really has it for you, really wants to know you? Really, that guy he's very clear. Or somebody who's so coy you can't tell you don't think they have a use, they don't want to be around you. Or are you attracted by the person you just can't figure out, little uncertainty there? And the vast majority of women chose the uncertain guy. And that's, to me, very interesting. Now, let me say this. I'm going to take it at face value. I was dating a minister's daughter in high school. I found out later I was her convenient date when she was between boyfriends. And her dad had been my minister growing up. And I don't know what I said or done, but something crazy, I'm sure. She gave me a book, and the title of the book was something like this: What Men Know About Women. It was printed by Lizard Lick Press. And it was 200 blank pages. Point made. Now, I will say, I can edit this out of the tape here if I need to. I will say that Cheryl's had the advantage of having the best caregiver in the history of caregivers. Nicole's in town. Anyway, it's important to realize uncertainty is part of life, right? Let me give a brief story. I know you're dying to hear one. This morning, I got up relatively early. I usually am up about 5:30-ish, somewhere in that range. I'm one of those people that, 5, 6 hours of sleep, I'm good to go. Cheryl, on the other hand, is an 8-hour, 9-hour person. I'm up this morning, 5:30-ish. Cheryl's awake because she's miserable. And she says, why don't you go ride your bike before it gets hot? So I said, oh, great, I'll do that. Got all my stuff on, got my helmet on, my gloves on, my mace from my back pocket, my earbuds so I can listen to my devotional, all this other stuff. I get out, jump on the bike. At the end of the driveway, I have a flat tire. It took me 30 minutes to fix the tire. I had a hard time getting it repaired. I have a blister on my thumb now from that. Now, I was certain I was going to ride my bike. I ended up riding it. But the point is, I could have been mad at Cheryl for suggesting it. I could have been mad at the manufacturer of tubes that had a tube that went bad. I could have been mad at whoever got me riding bikes in the first place. All kinds of stuff we can unload on when we're uncertain, when bad things happen, right? I could have been mad at God for allowing me to be born. I mean, what happens often in our lives, we find ourselves shifting blame on other things other than saying, now, wait a minute. So as I caught myself, my blood pressure going up a notch, I calmed myself down and enjoyed the process of putting the tire back on the rim. Blister and all. Not happy about a blister, but hey, whatever. The point is, we live with uncertainty. Is that true? Now, what are some things we're uncertain about? Well, we're uncertain about the future. Not really. We're uncertain about if you're here and you're under 50 years old, under 60 years old, you might be uncertain about whether you'll ever collect a day's worth of Social Security or not. A lot of uncertainty, right? Uncertainty about war. Uncertain about all kinds of stuff. Uncertain about what are you going to find next week when you go fill up your car with gas. Right? Uncertainty abounds. Now, let me just say about uncertainty. A summary statement here about uncertainty. I don't know how everything shakes out in the book of Revelation. I just know God wins. And that's a good thing. So uncertainty has its limits. Well, Ecclesiastes 8:7 says, no one knows what will happen in the future, and there is no one who can tell us. I marvel. I remember years ago, the 800 number you could call to find out your fortune. One of these was Dionne Warwick that had this thing going. Is she the right person that had this hustle going on? Was that who it was?
I think so. She was a psychic.
Yeah. Dionne Warwick. Her company went into bankruptcy. How come she didn't see that coming? Right? The point is, no one knows what will happen in the future. My point is, look at this passage in James. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to a certain city, we'll stay there a year, we'll open up a business, there we will make money, but you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. So how can you, if you think about how this really goes out, this uncertainty abounds. And the point James is trying to make, we'll get to in a moment. He says, and your life is brief and uncertain as a mist of a morning fog. It's here a little while, but then it disappears. How true. It is not fair that Mary and Marcy have this birthday today. You should still be that size. I was only here 2 weeks ago. What happened? That's how life works, right? It's a blink. Now, Solomon said this about time, if you will. He said, God has placed eternity in our hearts. There are a couple different translations of that. I'm not sure which one is right. Maybe both are. One of those ideas of God having placed eternity in our hearts, found in the book of Ecclesiastes, is this: that we all know, we're born, we are aware that we have a life that is eternal. That we know that there is a God out there, and that that means we're accountable to God. And let me just say this, frankly, no one has ever been born an atheist. No one's ever been born an atheist. And the fact of the matter is, you have to have an atheist recruit you to become an atheist. And that atheist has to tell you only a partial truth in order to convince you that there is no God. Because we're born with a God awareness. Romans 1 teaches that very clearly. We know that there's a God out there, and we know that that God is knowable, and we know that we're accountable to that God. All of that is found in Romans 1. We know those things by nature. And matter of fact, by nature, by conscience sake, it says that the Romans or the Greeks did those things contained in the law without having the law. Which means this: if you raise someone in a moral vacuum, at some point when they come out of that moral vacuum, they will understand there is a God, and they will understand the basic tenets of right and wrong. That has to be conditioned and trained and taught out of people. The next thing about this eternity written in their hearts is this, and I think this may be as well true. Time flies so fastly, we think it's going to always be the same. And then one day we wake up and realize, what is it somebody says, at first you believe there is a Santa Claus, and then you disbelieve there's a Santa Claus, and you grow old, you look like Santa Claus at some point. But the point is that life is brief. And that's what James is saying here. He also says, so instead you ought to say this: if it's the Lord's will, we will live long and do this or that. Otherwise, we're just boasting and bragging about something we don't have promised. But remember, anytime you know the right and thing to do and don't do it, to you it's a sin. So basically what James is saying is, use your days wisely. Do the right thing. Well, first of all, we must make our plans. We sometimes make our plans without asking God, right? Now, again, bear with me. I've told this before, I know, probably a dozen times. First time we were here, the very first 7 times we went out of town overnight, we came back early to do a funeral. Fred Daniels picked me up, handed me off. Edward Allen was at the beach. He picked me up at the beach and drove me to Kinston, and Fred Daniels brought me back to Horns. The next 7 times we left town a day or more late because of a funeral. 14 times in a row, funerals affected us. Most of those in that year, very tough year, most of those people did not see it coming. Most of those were sudden and tragic. The point is, we don't have a guarantee, and we kind of find ourselves making plans without God. And I'm way ahead of myself in my sermon, but my point would be this: I can only imagine, I've said to Nicole and Cheryl, we're going to go to the beach. Can you imagine the negative impact that could have had on Nicole as a little kid? But she understood. We talked through this stuff. It's really funny because she one day, out of nowhere, came up to me with her hand on her hip and said, "Daddy, when are you going to die?" And I said, "Honey, I have no plans to, but if I find out I'm going to, I'll tell you so you don't have to worry about it." That had to have been a God answer because it worked. Then she put her hand on her hip. She said, "Daddy, they're dropping like flies." She had to have heard that from Cheryl. I would never have said something like that. But making our plans without involving God in the process. James says it this way: now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to a certain city and we'll stay there a year, we'll open a business there, we'll make a profit. How careless is that? Now let me just say again, what James is not saying, he's not saying don't plan for the future. In fact, Proverbs is loaded with passages of Scripture that say to us, prepare for the future. Even the passages in Proverbs 6 or 7, I believe it is, Solomon says, consider the ant who labors all day preparing for the future. Prepare for the future. Prepare for the future. The next point is to have God's blessing involve Him in my planning. How basic is that? Just, ask God for guidance as we make our plans. And what does that do for me? It gives me the confidence that I'm at least on the right track in my planning. I may not get it right, but at least I'm putting God first in my planning. And one of the keys here is to pray as I plan my life. And we're talking about, everybody in here today, even though some of you don't look like it, everybody in here today is alive. Everyone here is alive. So we have to plan our lives around God's will. Pray as I plan my life. Proverbs says it this way: trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. He'll direct your path. James says it this way: if you want to know what God wants you to do, just ask Him, and He'll gladly tell you, for He is always ready to give a generous supply of wisdom to all who ask Him. David says it this way. David prayed, I'll run the course you lay out for me if you'll only show me the way and show me how. Pretty basic, I think. And it's important to understand the uncertainties out there are certainly, one of the certain things about uncertainties is there are uncertainties out there. That's a certainty. My next point is, the next pitfall is we presume that we all have a tomorrow. How many of you know or knew Lynn Ward? Remember Lynn Ward? He spoke at White Oak several times. Lynn Ward, his funeral was yesterday. Last Sunday, my understanding is last Sunday he was in church. He had some kidney pain, bad pain down here. Went to the emergency room. They treated him, sent him home. He went back the next day, hurting really bad. They admitted him. He had a cyst in his kidney. The cyst burst. His kidneys quit working, and his liver stopped working all at the same time. Again, it's terribly presumptuous for us to think we have tomorrow. And let me offer this. Live in the present. Live in the present. And let me say, again, with all due respect to AA, and I'm a firm believer in those steps, I think they're very helpful. You can't change the past. If you can, without doing further harm, go change it. But you don't live in the past. How dangerous it is to live in the past. What happens when we live in the past? We're paralyzed in the present and the future. And don't live in the future. We can create all kinds of anxiety for ourselves by trying to figure out what's going to happen next week and the week after. I'm not saying don't plan, but understanding that the future is not promised to anyone. A number of years ago, strange as this may sound, as a 19-year-old kid, I preached a sermon in Red Oak somewhere. I tried to find that church. I can't find it. And during the closing hymn, lightning hit a big oak tree right beside the church. I mean, the hair on everybody's neck stood up, and it was really close. And the sound was an explosion. And I made the statement. I said, listen, none of us have a promise of tomorrow. I said, every one of us could be killed. Could be killed on the way home in a head-on collision. 2 miles away from the church, I had a head-on collision. And the strangest thing was, I ran into a guy who had just preached in Rocky Mount and was headed to Red Oak. I just preached in Red Oak, headed to Rocky Mount. First person that stopped was a nurse, and she said, I never go this way. I just felt God compelled me to come this way today. The highway patrolman jumps out of his car, and he sees 2 preachers there that are talking in the middle of the road, and it's raining like crazy. I was going like 5 miles an hour. It was raining so hard. And the other guy was going maybe 15 miles an hour, still messed up our cars. And the highway patrolman, first words out of his mouth when he realized we're preachers, said, I just moved here. I'm looking for a good church. Now, I would have excluded the 2 of us from that option. But the point is, We don't have guarantees. What about the kid that was killed watching a badminton game this week? You know that story? Little girl, 4 years old, asked her mommy and daddy 3 days before this happened, how can I know for sure that I'll go to heaven when I die? And they talked to her about Jesus, and she prayed to ask Jesus into her life and her heart, accepted Jesus. She's out a couple days later, maybe the next day, watching her siblings playing badminton. And one of the rackets shatters, and a shard from that racket pierced her head. How do you explain that? And she died 3 days later in intensive care. We cannot explain that. I would never attempt to explain it. But we don't have promises about tomorrow. None of us do. James says this: you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. Your life is brief and uncertain as the mist of a morning fog. It's there a little while, but then it disappears. So instead, you ought to say, if it's God's will, we'll do this and that and the other. Otherwise, you're just boasting and bragging about yourself. Well, next point is this: live one day at a time and make it count. Live one day at a time and make it count. Wow. Why is that? Because that's all you got. That's all I have. I find myself quoting a verse on a regular basis. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Now, I typically wake up with happy feet. You know, from Steve Martin's old Saturday Night Live routine. I wake up with happy feet. Cheryl wakes up in a coma, gradually coming out of it. But the point of the matter is, every day, give that day to God. Now, once again, my mother, her mother, my grandmother, we watched her mellow over the years. My mother was confused by that because she was not the same mom who raised her. My grandmother, I asked her, I said, tell me about that. And she recognized it as well. She read through the Bible every year in a different version for the last 15 years of her life. Changed her. Wow. Jesus says it this way: don't worry about tomorrow, because each day will have its own worries. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Don't brashly brag about what you're going to do tomorrow, because you don't know the first thing about tomorrow. I love that version. James says if you put off doing what is right and good, don't put it off. It's a sin if you know what to do and don't do it. You know, it's interesting about tomorrow. Years ago, I don't know how many years ago it was, I was at Atlantic Beach, and I saw a sign on a restaurant. And the sign said, free beer tomorrow. The owner said that sign changed the restaurant totally, because people kept coming in wanting their free beer. And he said, oh, that's tomorrow. People came in droves wanting their free, oh, that's tomorrow. Now, you need to think about that. I'm going to eat better starting tomorrow. I'm going to read my Bible more starting tomorrow. I'm going to pray more starting tomorrow. I'm going to be more generous tomorrow. That's the best way in the world never to get anything done. I'm going to do it tomorrow. But remember, anytime you know the right thing to do and don't do it, it's sin. Whatever it is to do it now. Let's pray together. Thank you for tuning in to Horns Methodist Church today. If this message on uncertainty has been helpful, give us a call at 252-237-4616. We'd be glad to talk with you about this or anything else related to your journey. God bless you and have a great week in these uncertain times.